Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's Labor Forward. We're very excited to have you here for this faculty roundtable with Professor Erica Wells, Professor Michael Tyler, and Professor Don Taylor. And we're just going to be talking a little bit about the past, the present, and the future of the School for Workers. So we're very excited for this special Labor Forward that it's kind of in connection with our theme of this year. We're celebrating our 100th anniversary as a department. And we thought it was a good opportunity to kind of bring back a little bit of what the School for Workers is into Labor Forward. So welcome, everyone. So nice seeing you.
Hi, Logan.
Okay, so how this is going to work is that I have some questions prepared for faculty, and you can just, jump in and just, give your thoughts, or I can call you in some order. We will see how it plays out. And just to get us started, I guess what I wanted to talk about a little bit was the history of the School for Workers, right? Like the rich history dating back to its foundation in 1925. Kind of like, rooted in labor education and advocacy. And my question is like, how has the school mission evolved over the decades, and what, kind of key moments or challenges have shaped its identity today? Thinking that definitely a lot has happened in the last 100 years and definitely in the labor movement. So yeah. Michael, maybe you want to start?
Sure, I'll play the seniority card. So, and I guess a little background, obviously people know, I think many of the people that are on the call today have been in classes and know us. All that information's on our website, obviously, but I joined the faculty back in 2005 when we were celebrating our 80th anniversary, and I went from number 8 on the seniority list at that point to, if you stay around long enough, eventually you become at the top of the list. And I guess I won't say too. I think we should take turns starting the questions so that other people can then, get all the good answers in before they're all taken. But on this one, I'll try not to take too many of them by being brief in the sense that the School for Workers is the oldest labor ed program in the country, precisely because it started, well, 10 years before the Wagner Act even. And it was a social welfare. Originally, it was like their intent and mission. It was focused on women working in industry. It was part of the Bryn Mawr experiment. It was a joint project with Bryn Mawr in their women's school and the YWCA here in Madison. And so obviously we've evolved a great deal since then. Um, I guess I would just say it's part of that rich legacy that uh, the School for Workers has always sort of tried to adapt to the temper of the times. And I can say, I mean, we could spend the 20 minutes on that question, but I'll just
Mhm.
stop and defer to my other colleagues. And if anybody wants a little more information, or I can spackle in maybe some cracks at the end, but I think that's enough to get us started.
Sure. I'll add to what you said, Michael. You mentioned that the School for Workers started as a women's summer school for women in industry. It was part of the larger Bryn Mawr project that had started in maybe 1921, and it was to provide education for working women through the university, but not just in the traditional university classes. And to do that, it meant adopting different subject matters, different pedagogical methods. And increasingly, it moved away from just the social mission of the YWCA and towards partnerships with labor unions over time. And so this is part of our rich history. It gets picked up in the 1970s by the United Association for Labor Education, who starts doing regional women's summer schools. And bringing those two histories together this year as part of celebrating our 100th anniversary, the School for Workers will be hosting the Midwest School for Women Workers. We still have registration open for that. We're really excited to have more people come. And what we're doing is we're drawing on that history. We have classes that we're doing, specific classes, labor history, diversity and engagement in unions, as well as having community partners come in and talk about their work that they're doing, and participants do the same thing. So it's a combination of educational classes, networking, outreach, all of those things. And it will be on campus. And we have facilities at the dorms for people who want to stay, or you can be a commuter. Breakfast and dinner is provided. It's June 19th through the 22nd. And if you go to our website, there's more specific information. You can also sign up, and we do have scholarships that are still available. So if you're interested in coming, but you're worried about how to pay for it, there's a link to be able to apply for a scholarship as well.
Cool. And I'll just simply add, getting back to Lola's question about how the mission has changed. I honestly don't know if how to the degree to which the wording of the mission has changed over the years, but the spirit of the mission, I don't think has ever really changed, which from the beginning, even with the YWCA, summer school for women in industry, the idea was to bring the resources of the university into the communities of the workers of Wisconsin, and that's something that has never really changed. What has changed is the ways in which we do it, and the populations of workers that we've reached out to, and obviously the economic forces that transform and change in the way that they act upon workers that they need to respond to, and we've always been there to try to assist with that adaptation. One thing I'll say simply as a quick side note is Michael pulled the seniority card, but I'll not to embarrass anybody, but we have an audience member who is a professor emeritus at the School for Workers, David Knack. So I just wanted to identify and thank David for being here today, since he outranks even you, Michael.
I don't know. Is Commodore above Admiral? I guess I would say one other thing, which is obviously this is a nod to David and Maurice Better and my senior colleagues who are all happily retired now, is back at the 80th, David was a part of the project that put together a short video about the School for Workers history up till then, which is actually available on our YouTube channel. It's about 20 minutes. But it's a great primer on just sort of how, to your specific question, Lola, the School for Worker has engaged with workers across Wisconsin and across the nation and the world through our history. So we give a plug for that too.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and for sharing that and for pointing out to the video, which I've seen and I do recommend watching. It's pretty cool. And now I know that Dawn has been involved in digging up pictures, Angela as well, and pictures from like about the history and the different events, trainings, and programming that the School for Workers has done throughout the years, and they're pretty amazing. Some of them have been posted on social media if you have the chance of seeing them, and there's also a timeline in a 100th anniversary website that is really, really cool. And this is a good segue actually to my second question, which is a little more Wisconsin specific, I guess. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about, like, kind of the distinctive history of Wisconsin and how this legacy, but both the present conditions in Wisconsin also impact not only, shape the challenges of the Wisconsin labor movement and the work that the Wisconsin labor movement does, and how the School for Workers plays a role in it, how it adapts or does things based on learning from the specificity of Wisconsin history, right? So anyone can start. Hey, Dawn, you want to start?
I was going to say, Michael said we were going to take turns starting. Well, in a general way, I would just say that, one of the first major transformations that the School for Workers underwent was, within a couple decades after our birth, the industrial union movement, grew, I guess would be the very understated way to say it. And so as the School for Workers adapted to that, it became very much attached to the industrial labor movement, not just the industrial workers, but you know, as the labor movement became a more legitimized component of society in the United States, and arguably bureaucratized, and became a little less of a movement and a little more of a service providing set of organizations. We were there for that, and we provided tools for union leaders and union members to run meetings and to file grievances, and to even do things like do competing time studies to contest their bosses' time studies in terms of how fast the line was going to move. And because Wisconsin was at that time one of the preeminent industrial states in the country, with all, mainly across the southern tier of the state, that made us a very integral part of what was happening, both with the AFL and the CIO up until the 1950s. And of course, there's more that can be said that's Wisconsin specific when we get into the public sector of the last couple decades, but I didn't want to hog all the time. I'll leave that for somebody else. One other thing I'll mention too, though, is that something that I wasn't aware of until we started doing more historical research for our anniversary was the degree to which that we were working with Wisconsin public sector employees before they had collective bargaining. So we were doing institutes for teachers, for example, in the 1940s. And so that's my way of teeing up if anybody wants to talk about more recent Wisconsin events.
I would let Michael talk about that since you're here for more of that. But I guess my perspective on this is just, I will kind of take a step up looking broadly at it and say for those people who may be less familiar with our program, one of the things that I think really ties it to Wisconsin and the Wisconsin history and what we do is the Wisconsin idea. The idea that what we do on campus should be for the benefit of the greater good and shouldn't just be on campus, but should be in the communities, is so central to pretty much everything that we do at the School for Workers. I think that what we do really embodies that ideal. And that ideal comes out of how education was viewed and how the university was viewed. And, Bob La Follette and this idea of what education can do to make a better society. And I think the School for Workers really embodies that in their programming.
Yes, exactly. No question about it. And I mean, even just to go a little further, you mentioned La Follette and just sort of the progressive ideal of Wisconsin. I think part of what made it fertile ground for the women's school before even the Wagner Act was passed was just, I mean, if you look at the history of Wisconsin, it's the first state in the union that passed workers' compensation, that had unemployment insurance. Um, Actually, that SEIU's first local 1, were the Capitol workers at the Wisconsin State Capitol, or sorry, AFSCME rather. And again, the Peace Act of 1959, Wisconsin was the first state that actually legally recognized public sector workers' right to bargain collectively with their employer. So the School for Workers obviously was impacted by and was a part of all those major changes as they were implemented here in Wisconsin and, across the nation. I guess I would say I want to quote another one of my emeritus colleagues by saying pretty much every campus has a school of business, but you can Google us. There's only one School for Workers, and I always like to remind folks that are attending our programs, we are your department. We are your link to the university. The university is here to serve all of the citizens of Wisconsin and beyond, and we are your department that does that. So.
Thank you for that. That's amazing. And I'm gonna add add a little bit more to this question, and just particularly because I know the department a few years ago put together an article in which you were looking at the impacts of Act 10. And I know that there's so much discussion about Act 10 constantly in Wisconsin, but I wanted to, kind of like the faculty's take on what you see. How do you see that now? It's been almost 15 years. Kind of still impacting labor organizing in Wisconsin, and specifically, thinking about the work that we do with workers, yeah, and the changes that has had, or the things that we learned that can be applicable elsewhere.
So that's a master's thesis minimum.
No, just give me a snippet, Michael, just a little bit.
All I would say is, I mean, in a real sense, some of the changes we've seen since January remind me pretty vividly in terms of major structural changes that are having in this case, this year, a huge adverse impact on federal workers and their unions, right? And that's kind of second verse, same as the first in terms of what we saw play out in 2011 and subsequently, the time after that, the several years after that, where, yeah, Wisconsin sadly led the nation in union membership decline, primarily that of the public sector unions here in Wisconsin. So, I mean, I guess the moral, or I guess the takeaway, is that workers are still going to advocate for, justice in their workplace, right? And they're going to do what they need to do to feel like that their voice is heard and that they have equity. And that doesn't change despite whatever any laws say. And the School for Workers has continued to work with workers where they're at to fill whatever needs they have to try and help them bring that about.
Yeah, I would add that the in the immediate aftermath of Act 10, obviously public sector workers in Wisconsin had collective bargaining for several decades, as Michael pointed out, since 1959. And so I think we played an important role in first of all helping unions make the adaptation to the new environment, and what are the things that we can still do, and where can we still have a voice and impact our own wages and working conditions and voice on the job. But also, it's very difficult for people to make a culture change like that. And so even bigger picture than what's the new process for filing a grievance, if there is such a process, it became, what's the new concept of what a union even is and does in the public sector. And that's a really difficult thing for people to get their heads around. And we played a role in that as well. We were in conference rooms with AFSCME leadership and WEAC leadership and others, trying to help them figure out what it means to be a union, a public sector union, in the new context, because it was the status quo had a very heavy gravity, that it was hard to reimagine a new type of organization. And I hope we were helpful in that.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. Like that, I think I've shared this before in other settings, but when I was applying to grad school many years ago, my essay, which was a discussion about public workers' struggles in Argentina, started with Wisconsin, and it started with the struggle around Act 10. And I think that as we see the changes impacting federal workers, I think for me, a question that lingers, and I know it's in the heads of the faculty here, is like, how can we learn from what happened in Wisconsin as public sector workers are struggling more broadly, and why are they such a threat that they keep being targeted, right? Why are public workers such a threat? And their way of coming together and the capacity of making a difference. And I think that that's something that I continuously think about, and that it was originally inspired by Wisconsin struggles, even all the way in Buenos Aires. Yeah, so I have a last question to pose, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for people in the audience to ask questions. So I don't know how it works, if you need to write them somewhere, if you're going to be able to speak, I don't know, Angela, tell me. Maybe they need to write it in the chat, and we can share the questions with the rest of the faculty. But my last question is a little bit about like looking forward, I guess. With the, we've seen a lot of changes, like both like union density decline in the United States for the past decades, radical transformations in the workplace. but at the same time, kind of like a labor resurgence in the past years, right? Like some, we talked about, there was like a labor spring, a moment of more action, of more, or of new organizing. And I guess in which ways does this like new terrain translate into the work of a School for Workers today? There be with partnerships, with research, with the type of trainings that we're doing. Yeah, so maybe you want to say a little bit about what we're doing now and what we're looking forward to do.
Sure, I can start with that one. I think this is another one where the School for Workers is really uniquely positioned to do work that speaks to the moment, because oftentimes labor organizations or groups of workers will come to us and say, we have this situation. Can you help us with this? And that might mean that there's a research project that needs done. That might mean that there's a specific custom course that needs designed. And so oftentimes we take our cue from the community and when the labor movement in the communities reach out. So I'll give two concrete examples. One is that Don and I are working with a Central Labor Council on creating a strategic plan with them, looking at the future, how they can engage the different workforce, the changing workforce which they represent, and also the different demographics and the different ages, and how can we help them create this plan for the future? So that's one thing that we're doing. In my own research, one of the things that I'm looking at is energy transition and specifically the impact on the Navajo Nation. And that's something where members who were members of the United Mine Workers and members of the Navajo Nation came to me and said, we have this situation. It's not really being talked about much in research and in the press. What's really going on here? We would like to invite you to come to the nation and speak to people and collect these oral histories and talk about the impact of what coal phase out is, and especially when there is no energy transition because no other jobs or no clean energy comes in to take that place. And so that's something that kind of speaks to the moment where we're at in energy transition, but also I think exemplifies the way that as the School for Workers, we try to be responsive in our research, our teaching, our service to the communities, as part of that Wisconsin idea, as part of that larger concept.
No, it's a great answer, Erica. And I guess I would just add on without taking everything from so that Don has something to clean up. The to me, it's interesting, and I'm always fascinated by how much the history echoes with the present, whether we're talking about the precarity of work, whether we're talking about the deterioration of working conditions. It's always fascinating to me how similar a lot of the struggles of workers today mirror those of the workers that are that were around at the start of the School for Workers, and obviously at the start of the before then, at the start of the Industrial Revolution. So again, whether we're talking about the gig economy, whether we're talking about major corporations focused on productivity and maximizing throughput, these are the same issues that our parents and grandparents as workers faced and dealt with. And it's always interesting to figure out how in this moment we can help people figure out the best way for them to respond to those.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll just add, an immediate example comes to mind is that obviously there are differences, but at certain levels, Michael is exactly right that, for example, AI, when it comes to its impact on the workforce, is comparable to the introduction of the sewing machine to shoemaking. Right? And that's how these issues become the same. And I put that in quotes to some extent because they're not entirely the same. But the introduction of technology advances society and can make things better, but it also is often either intentionally or unintentionally a thing that de-skills workers, that speeds up work and eliminates jobs. And so in the same way that workers had to adapt to the mechanization of shoemaking, to go back to my other example. Something that we're just now starting to dip our toes in is, work, as Erica said, workers often come to us and they're saying, we're concerned about AI and its impact on our jobs. And so we're trying to figure out how we can insert ourselves into that equation so that we can once again be a resource for workers to figure out where their voice fits into impacting the how that proceeds. There obviously is no stopping it, but how can it be done in a way that's just and beneficial to working families? So that's where I see our next big area is the impact of AI.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your answers. And I guess just to add that a little bit from the type of work that I've been doing, I think that's something else that the School for Workers has been thinking about, doing research and doing organizing around, is like, yeah, like forms of organizing that combine community, labor, and maybe like, immigrant workers' rights organizing all together in what we would say, well, it's like less traditional as labor organizing, but at the same time is rooted in forms of organizing that are very historical, that, and that show how communities come together, right? Not only to fight for better workplaces, but also to fight for better living conditions, right? And I think that that's kind of also one of the challenges to understand, like precarity and informal labor also kind of like changes the landscape in which we're organizing, and like workplaces might look a little different in the sense that might not be a factory what we're trying to organize, but a neighborhood comprised of a lot of people who are doing similar work, right? Or facing similar conditions with different employers. But there's a lot of labor education that can be done from those spaces and in collaboration with organizations from Wisconsin, like Worker Justice Wisconsin, Voces de la Frontera, which me and another faculty, Amarno Ibarra, have been doing for a while. So I think that that's also part of what how the School for Workers is approaching present and future of workers, both in Wisconsin and nationally. Well, thank you, the three of you, so much. So now we'll see if there's any questions in the chat or any comments. I don't see any. So and maybe to wrap it up, if there's anything else you would like to add, anything else you would like to share in the 3 minutes or so that we have left?
I'll give a quick anecdote while people think of their question if they want to. And you reminded me of it because back to the theme of, what's old is new again. I remember right as I started at the School for Workers, I was doing a program with a local in Milwaukee. And I remember going into their hall and seeing their charter and one of their first contracts, Auf Deutsch, in German. So again, immigrants obviously played a major role in the development of industrial Milwaukee. And yeah, that continues to be the case in the United States yet today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if we want to do a plug, like maybe we should start saying to folks that we're going to be continue celebrating our 100th-year anniversary with more events. We have like a big event coming up in September that you should hear more about soon. And then hopefully folks can join us celebrating our department, all this rich history, all this work that has been done, and it's continued to being done with and for workers and for workplace democracy. Erica, Dawn, anything else?
I have nothing other than to thank folks who were here. It's a list of familiar names that I'm looking at, and I thank each and every one of you for coming today and listening to us talk about ourselves, which we don't usually get to do in these broadcasts.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, all of you, for your answers and sharing a little bit of our department's history. Yeah, it's been a great pleasure, and it's a great pleasure to be working with you all.
Thank you, Lola.
All right. Thank you, Lola, for hosting.
Bye, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next month for the next Labor Forward.